Hello everybody! I am back again with my third batch of books for my April catch-up wrap-up, and we'll get straight into it. The first book that I have to talk about in this batch of 5 is Into the Fire by Elizabeth Moon. This is the second book in the Vada's Peace series, which itself is a sequel series to Vada's War, which contains 5 books. So because of that, the fact that it's a sequel to Cold Welcome and that a bunch of other things happened in a previous series, I'll be a bit briefer about what actually happens here. All of the books focus on Kailara Vada. She is a member of the Vada family, which has a very successful interstellar trading corporation, which is based on this planet, their home planet, called Slaughter Key. After the adventures in the first series, when Kai is ejected from the military academy and then rises to become an admiral of her own ad hoc fleet, she finally returns to Slaughter Key in Cold Welcome. Unfortunately, the transport ship that Kai is on to take her down to the surface of the planet is sabotaged. Kai survives mainly because she uses her own equipment rather than somebody else's, and then she must help the other people survive after they crash land. They do eventually end up on this large island that they believe is inhospitable and that there's nothing there, and they're going to try to survive the winter there as bad weather rolls in, and they don't know if anybody's looking for them or looking for them there. Into the Fire is the aftermath of what happens in Cold Welcome. Essentially, Kai has to rescue the survivors again from their rescuers. And that's because while they were on the island, they uncovered some long-held secrets that this mysterious faction will do anything to keep under wraps, to the extent of making all of these people disappear and killing them. I won't say any more because I don't want to spoil any of the previous events. I love these books. I love Kai, and I would highly recommend that if you're interested in this character, in the events, that you go back and you read the very, very first book, which is called Trading in Danger, and that's when all of the adventures start. There are 2 things I want to point out that I really enjoyed about this book, which can probably be said of any of the previous books as well, but I really enjoy how Moon writes these books, the way that she writes the military culture, the chain of command, and how people behave within that structure. I've always really enjoyed that. It's very believable. I also really enjoy how she writes action, specifically battles. I've always been impressed with how she conveys space battles, which can be very confusing. In this book, there aren't any space battles, but Kai has her first opportunity to engage in a land battle, which takes a different set of skills, and she still pulls it off, and the writing of that is very good, but it was a really interesting situation because she has to translate skills, but also rely on other people. And that's the second thing that I really enjoy. This book, the whole series, is chock full of good people who are competent. And Kai is number 1 there. She is a naturally gifted leader. She knows how to command. She knows how to manage people. But just overall, she's competent. And I love reading about people who have confidence in their skills and know how to do their jobs well and insist on doing things the right way. But I also think that in these last couple of books, it's become clear to me that Kai, while she's very good at being a commander, she's also good at taking care of people. She has her flaws, but she always sees the people that she's commanding, that she's leading, as human beings. People who have their own physical and mental and emotional challenges, who have loved ones and families, and that she needs to take care of almost as if they are her family. And that, I think, really comes to the fore in this book because Kai isn't actually the commander of a lot of these survivors. She comes from a completely different organization and command structure, but she became their de facto leader because she had the skills and because she impressed them. They trusted her. And because she is a very loyal commander who takes her role very seriously, she refuses to leave these people behind. Even though they're not technically her people, she will take care of them until she knows that they are gonna be okay. And I love that. I need more of that. Moving on, however, the next book that I read was Typescript of the Second Origin by Manuel de Pedrolo, which is translated from Catalan by Sara Martin. This is a completely different book from Into the Fire. It's really hard to segue into it. For simplicity's sake, I would categorize this as young adult dystopic science fiction, but it was written maybe in the 60s or 70s when young adult wasn't really a thing, but I would just slot it into the YA category because I think that's a demographic that it feels like it suits. Given some of the content in this book, I wouldn't give it to younger readers, but I do think it would be well suited for young adult audiences and for adult readers as well. In this book, aliens arrive and destroy humanity. Their purpose is never fully understood, but it's speculated that they wanted to colonize the planet, and so they bring this sonic weapon in, which kills all large mammals and topples most large structures. The only people who survive are those who happen to be underwater at the time. And the two main characters who survive are a 14-year-old girl and a 9-year-old boy from a Catalan village who were in a pond at the time she was rescuing him from the pond. And when they emerge, everyone is dead, their village is in ruins, and they know immediately that they are the only survivors. And the way that they react is remarkable. Of course they're shocked. Their families are dead, they grieve, but they're also rather matter-of-fact about it. They know they're the only ones and they need to survive. They immediately scour the ruins of their village for supplies, for food. They leave because they know they can't be in the village. They can't bury all the bodies and they have to get away from, the putrefaction. So they head off to a cave in the woods and they live. A lot of this is them exploring their world completely empty of people and seeking books, seeking some answers of what happened, if there are any other people out there. But mainly, they are happy with themselves and they have a plan for the future. They are going to have children and bring people back into the world. This book does have some content. There are some taboos challenged, which is my small caveat for the book, why I wouldn't necessarily put this in the hands of younger, very young readers. But I think the thing to keep in mind is that the kids who are doing everything are innocent. They don't have adult assumptions, adult prejudices, or taboos. They do what they are comfortable doing, what they feel they need to do, without all of this baggage that adults would have. So near the end of the book, the topic of incest as a means to keep the species alive, is broached. And if you know me, I really don't like reading about incest. I find it to be a very squicky topic, and I usually DNF books hard when I get to the mentions of incest. This comes at the very end though. It's more implied than anything. Nothing is actually shown, but it could perhaps be a bit disturbing to some people. I approached it though from the angle that the kids were innocent, that they were trying so hard to stay alive and to keep humanity alive, and they just did not have the same reasoning or problems with the issues that adults would have. So it was good. It was not written in the style that I thought it would be written in, a little bit simpler, a little bit more bare bones, but there's so much to dig into this relatively simple story, and I really enjoyed that. So if you're looking for a slightly different dystopic science fiction novel or translated SFF, I would recommend this one. Next, I read Mandelbrot the Magnificent, which is a short novella by Liz Ziemska. This is a fictional fantasy story about a real mathematician, Benoit Mandelbrot. Mandelbrot's family came from Poland. They escaped from Poland and were living in a village in France during World War II. They moved there to get ahead of the Nazis and survive because they were Jewish. And in this story, it's sort of a flashback as a much older Mandelbrot remembers how he saved his family one year when Germany had invaded France. Essentially, he learns how to use his mathematical ability with like fractals to hide his family so that the Nazis wouldn't find them and their neighbors couldn't give them away. And that's pretty much it. It was really short. I really love the infusion of mathematics into fantasy and also science fiction, but mathematics as magic is quite a buzzword for me. And I really enjoyed that, but it was too short. It needed to be fleshed out a bit more. And it's literally framed as a flashback. You know, there's a beginning and end where much older Mandelbrot is looking back on this past. And I wish kind of that framing had been removed and those pages, you know, just an extra 30 pages or so used to flesh out the characters a bit more and their actions, because otherwise it just felt a little too brief. And maybe I would have wanted a bit more connection with Mandelbrot's later life in the story, because he does this one fantastical magical thing and then never does it again in the future or something. So good premise, but if this were ever expanded into a novel, I would definitely read it, and I think it would be better for longer page length. Next is a poetry collection that I've already talked about in my latest book haul, but I'm going to repeat myself here. This is Life on Mars by Tracy K. Smith. So this collection has been on my TBR for years because I first came across it described as kind of a science space themed poetry collection, and that caught my interest. I really want to read more poetry, but I'm looking for some that intersect with my interests, like science fiction and fantasy and such. So I finally found a copy, and this is themed around space, but I think it's actually more accurately said to be themed around Smith's father, who was an engineer on the Hubble telescope. Some of the major pieces in this talk about space and reference her father and the Hubble telescope. And then there's another major piece that is about his death. And I found those bits to be very touching. I really enjoyed the content of those pieces. There are some other poems in here that didn't seem to really fit that theme as much, and I didn't like them as much. My main issue with this is that I really don't know how to read and interpret poetry. Once, many years ago in elementary school, I actually had poetry courses and I learned a lot about that, but I've forgotten so much. And I felt like I couldn't really understand how many of the poems were constructed and thus what they meant. I did reread some of the bits in this, and I actually decided to read them aloud. I reread aloud to myself my favorite poems from this, and oh my goodness, that really makes the rhythm, the feel of the poems come alive. I can't really see the rhythm when I am reading it on the page, but when I start reading it aloud, the beats just come naturally and it suddenly flowed more and it felt like poetry, and that was really good. So I think some of these things I just need to read aloud to myself, but definitely I will reread this more a couple of times and see what I think as I learn more about poetry. And the last thing for this batch is Summer in Orcus by Ursula Vernon, which is a middle grade or young adult fantasy story. This is about a girl named Summer whose mother is extremely overprotective of her. She's probably mentally ill. And Summer one day is in her backyard when Baba Yaga's hut comes walking down the alley, and Baba Yaga invites her in and basically gives her her heart's desire, but doesn't tell her what it is, just leaves her in a fantasy land where she goes on an adventure. Mainly, Summer wants to save the frog tree. She first encounters these trees that when their leaves fall to the ground, they turn into things. And there is this tree that it's struggling so hard to bring its leaves forth, and when they hit the ground, they're supposed to become frogs. But there's something wrong with the tree, it's dying. And she goes on this journey to find out what is infecting all of the magical things in this world and how to stop it and save the world. Not exactly save the world, because I think that is the message here. Summer goes on this journey to find her heart's desire, and what she really wants is this small thing. I found that to be really emotional. I think this is a portal fantasy written more for adults. addressing the things that Vernon hasn't liked so much about Portal Fantasies now that she's an adult. But the reason that Summer goes on this adventure, what she gets out of it, what hurts her, but also what she achieves, is the really emotional bit. However, it's not my favorite thing I've read by Vernon. It says by T. Kingfisher. Her real name is Ursula Vernon. This is made up out of a lot of odds and ends that Vernon had left over that didn't fit into other stories. So it's a bit episodic, it's a bit wander this way and come across these things, and wander that way and come across the other things. And I didn't feel it was extremely cohesive. It works, but it was a bit more jumbled together than I would have liked. I wish I was a bit more coherent and specific about what I liked and didn't like in this book, but unfortunately I was reading it on a car trip and I was getting interrupted a lot. I did not take notes, and I really regret that now because there were some specific things I knew I wanted to mention and now I can't remember what pages they were on. But anyway, you get my rambly, vague monologue instead. That is it for this batch of 5 books. Thank you for sticking with me through this long April wrap-up, and I'll be back very soon with the next installment, and until then, bye.